The signal came from a small yellow star on the edge of the galaxy. It was weak, clumsy, and completely wrong by every standard the Galactic Coalition knew. For 12,000 years, the Coalition had welcomed new species into their ranks. They knew exactly how first contact should work. A mathematical sequence, universal constants, clean, logical, predictable. This signal was none of those things. Hyun-woo stood in the grand chamber of Coalition Station Omega, his crystalline body catching the light from 1,000 distant suns. He had served as an ambassador for 300 years. He had greeted 42 different species. He thought he had seen everything the universe could offer. He was wrong. The humans sent music. They sent pictures of their world, images of animals and oceans and cities. They sent recordings of something their language called laughter. Worst of all, they sent files that the translation computers simply could not process. The humans labeled these files as memes and seemed to think they were important. "This makes no sense," said Taewon, the ancient administrator who had processed every new species for the past 4 centuries. His 6 eyes blinked in confusion as he studied the human transmission. "Where are the mathematical proofs? Where are the universal constants? How are we supposed to verify their intelligence?" "Perhaps," Hyun-woo said slowly, "we should simply ask them." 3 weeks later, the human ship arrived. The Coalition had prepared for a standard diplomatic vessel. They expected a small crew, perhaps 5 individuals trained in proper protocols and formal communication. They had prepared the ceremonial hall, set up the translation matrices, and drafted the standard welcome documents. What arrived was something entirely different. The ship was called the Indomitable Spirit, and it was huge, messy, and covered in markings that served no apparent function. As it docked with the station, Hyun-woo could see through the viewports that the interior was filled with plants. Real living plants, growing inside a spaceship. The airlock opened, and Captain Ji-won stepped through. She was tall for a human, with dark hair tied back in a simple style. She wore a uniform that was professional but somehow relaxed at the same time. Behind her came a stream of other humans. Too many humans. The Coalition had prepared for 5. There were 20. "Greetings," Ji-won said, and her translator worked perfectly. She smiled, showing her teeth, which the Coalition database said was a sign of friendliness in humans. "Thank you for inviting us. We're excited to be here, excited. Not honored. Not grateful, excited." Behind Ji-won came her crew. There was Dr. Sun-hee, who immediately walked up to the nearest alien representative and asked if she could touch their fur. There was Min-ho, who the humans identified as their chef, a concept that confused the Coalition since they all used nutrient synthesizers. There were engineers, scientists, artists, and one person whose job was listed simply as Vibes Coordinator. "We have prepared the formal documentation," Taewon said, holding out a data crystal containing the standard 17-page welcome document that required 47 signatures. "If you would please review and— Oh, can we do that later?" Ji-won asked. "We've been in space for 6 weeks and we'd really love to see around the station first. Also, Minho wants to cook dinner for everyone." "Do you eat? I mean, I know you process nutrients, but do you actually eat food?" Taewon's translator made a sound that might have been confusion. The next few hours became what the Coalition would later describe as highly irregular. The humans did not follow protocol. Yoonji, their liaison officer, looked at the 17-page document and asked why it needed 17 pages. "Most of this is just the same information repeated," she said. "And why does it need to go to 47 different offices? Can't 3 people just make the decision?" No one had ever questioned the bureaucracy before. Dr. Sun-hee moved through the station like a child in a new playground. She stopped at every species, asking questions that were not in any database. "What do you do for fun?" she asked a Velthier warrior. "Do you have music?" she asked a Krillith administrator. "What makes you laugh?" she asked everyone she met. The Coalition didn't have answers to these questions. Fun was inefficient. Music was unnecessary. Laughter served no logical purpose. But the humans seemed to think these things were important. Minho set up a cooking area in one of the station's cargo bays. He brought out pots and pans and ingredients from Earth. The smells that filled the station were unlike anything the Coalition had experienced through their nutrient synthesizers. Minho invited everyone to try his food. Most species declined. Their bodies processed nutrients efficiently through chemical synthesis. Eating food the old way was primitive, messy, and unnecessary, but a few tried it. And the expressions on their faces made Hyunwoo wonder what else the coalition might have forgotten in their 12,000 years of perfect efficiency. By the end of the first day, the humans had broken 16 protocols, questioned 7 fundamental procedures, and somehow made 3 different species laugh for the first time in centuries. They don't follow the rules, Taewon complained to Hyunwoo that evening. No, Hyunwoo agreed, watching through a viewport as Jiwon showed a group of young Skal warriors how to play something called soccer, using a ball made of compressed fabric. They don't. This is highly irregular. Yes. Should we file a report? Hyunwoo watched the humans and aliens running together, chasing the ball, laughing when they fell, celebrating when someone scored. The Skal were a warrior species bred for combat and discipline. He had never seen them play before. Let's wait, Hyunwoo said. I want to see what happens next. The coalition had rules for everything. Rules for communication, rules for technology, rules for diplomacy. These rules had been refined over 12,000 years. They were perfect, efficient, and logical. The humans followed none of them. Over the next week, the station changed. Minho's cooking attracted more visitors each day. Dr. Sunhee organized something called a culture exchange, where species shared stories instead of data. Yoonji worked with Taewon to streamline the welcome documentation from 17 pages to 3, and the old administrator admitted it worked just as well. The engineers studied human technology and were baffled. The ships shouldn't work. They violated 6 different safety protocols. The power distribution was inefficient. The life support systems were overcomplicated, but they worked. Somehow they worked. How do you do it? A Krelith engineer asked Junho, one of the human technicians. These systems should fail. The mathematics don't support this design. Junho shrugged. Yeah, the math says it shouldn't work. But it does, so we stopped worrying about it. Stopped worrying about it, as if the fundamental laws of physics were optional. At the end of 2 weeks, the Coalition Council met to discuss the humans. They had been classified as a probationary species pending evaluation. The standard integration process would take 5 years. They don't follow protocols, said one council member. They question everything, said another. They make no sense by any logical standard, said a third. Hyunwoo stood before the council. All of this is true, he said. And yet, since they arrived, 17 different species have reported increased efficiency in their departments. Bureaucratic processes that have existed for thousands of years have been simplified, and 3 species have started creating something humans call art for the first time. The council was silent. I propose, Hyunwoo continued, that we accept the humans as full members immediately. Not because they follow our rules, but because we need people who don't. The vote was close, but it passed. That night, Jiwon stood with Hyunwoo on the observation deck, looking out at the stars, she said. Everyone keeps telling us we do things wrong. You do, Hyunwoo agreed. Jiwon smiled. Good. If we did everything the way it's always been done, nothing would ever change. Hyunwoo thought about 12,000 years of perfect, unchanging efficiency. And for the first time in his 300 years, he wondered if perfect had been the problem all along. The emergency signal came 3 months after the humans joined the coalition. It came from the Terthan system, and it made every scientist in the galaxy stop what they were doing. The Endless Archive was dying. For 60,000 years, the archive had floated in space, a massive structure that held the complete history of every civilization in the coalition. Every discovery, every achievement, every moment worth remembering was stored there. It was protected by quantum locks that were supposed to last forever. Forever ended on a Tuesday. Borum was the first scientist to arrive. She had studied quantum mechanics for 200 years and had written 40 research papers on the archive systems. She stood in the observation room, staring at the readings, and felt something she had not felt in centuries. Fear. It's a quantum paradox, she explained to the others as they arrived. The archive's foundation exists in multiple states at once. But something has caused those states to conflict. The math says both states are true, but they contradict each other. It's impossible. Can we fix it? Asked Ki-hyun, a physicist from the Mendrath Collective. No, Borum said simply. We can't fix what shouldn't exist. The paradox is consuming the archive from the inside. We have maybe 4 days before the entire structure collapses. Scientists came from everywhere. The greatest minds of 47 species gathered in the Terthan system. They ran simulations, built models, and calculated every possible solution. Every answer came back the same. Impossible. We need to evacuate the data, Taewon said on day 3. The old administrator looked tired. We can't save the structure, but we can save copies of the most important files. We'll lose 90% of the archive, Borum said quietly. 60,000 years of history, gone. The Coalition accepted this. Sometimes the universe simply won. Sometimes problems had no solutions. This was one of those times. Then Junho arrived. The human engineer came on day 4 with a team of 6 others. He listened to Borum's explanation of the quantum paradox for exactly 20 minutes. Then he said something that made the translators pause. What if we're thinking about this wrong? Every scientist in the room looked at him. The paradox exists because 2 states are both true but contradict each other, right? Junho said. We're trying to prove one state is real and the other isn't. What if we stop trying to solve the paradox and just accept it? That's not how physics works, Borum said. Isn't it, though? Junho pulled up a display and started drawing. His diagram looked nothing like proper scientific notation. It was messy, with arrows going in multiple directions and notes written in simple language. Look, the archive exists in both states. That's the problem. But it's also the solution. What if we make both states stable? That's impossible, said Ki-hyun. Why? The question hung in the air. Why was it impossible? Because the math said so. Because it had never been done. Because it contradicted fundamental principles. These were all good reasons. But they weren't answers. Daeon, one of the human programmers, spoke up. I built a simulation last night. Not to solve the paradox, but to model it. What if we don't fight the contradiction? What if we make it part of the system? She displayed her work. The Coalition scientists stared at it in horror. The simulation didn't resolve the paradox. It made it worse, adding more conflicting states. It should have collapsed immediately. Instead, it stabilized. This is insane, Borum said. Yeah, Daeon agreed. But does it work? For 6 hours, Coalition scientists studied the human proposal. It broke 3 fundamental laws of quantum mechanics. It required systems to exist in states that contradicted each other permanently. The math was ugly, held together by what humans called approximations instead of elegant proofs. It shouldn't work. By every standard of science the Coalition had developed over 12,000 years, it was impossible. But the simulation said it would work. We're running out of time, Hyunwoo said. He had arrived to observe, though he understood nothing of the science. Do we try this or do we evacuate? Borum looked at the human team. They seemed so confident, not because they knew it would work, but because they refused to believe it couldn't. If we try this and fail, we lose everything, she said. If we evacuate now, we save 10%. If we try and succeed, Junho said, we save everything. The decision took 3 minutes. They would try. The human team worked faster than any coalition group Borum had ever seen. They didn't follow proper protocols. They didn't file reports or wait for approvals. They just built. Ki-hyun worked with them, translating coalition technology into something that could interface with the human design. He found himself enjoying the chaos. The humans didn't spend hours debating the perfect solution. They tried something, and if it failed, they tried something else. This connection should be reinforced, Ki-hyun said, pointing at part of their design. You're probably right, Junho agreed, but we don't have time, so we'll use this temporary fix and hope it holds. Hope. A scientific strategy based on hope. Somehow, it felt right. 18 hours before the archive's projected collapse, they finished building. The device looked wrong. It had parts from 40 different species technologies, held together with human welding and what Junho called creative problem-solving, proper. Scientists would have been horrified. Borum activated it anyway, the device connected to the archive's quantum foundation. Immediately, alarms went off. The paradox was spreading, infecting the device itself. The contradiction was consuming everything. It's failing, someone said. No, Daeon said, watching her screens. It's working, watch. The paradox spread through the device, turning the entire system into a mass of contradictions. Every state existed and didn't exist at the same time. It should have collapsed into nothing. Instead, it stabilized. The device had become a paradox itself. And because it was a paradox, it could support the archive's paradox. Two impossibilities holding each other up. The archive stopped dying. The quantum collapse halted. The structure that had been moments from destruction became stable again. We did it, Junho said quietly. Borum ran scans for 6 straight hours. The archive was stable. More than stable. The paradox had become part of its foundation now, making it stronger than before. It would last another 60,000 years, maybe longer. This shouldn't work, she said for the 100th time. But it does, Ki-hyun said. The physicist was smiling, something his species rarely did. It works because we stopped trying to prove it was impossible and just made it happen. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. The humans had saved the endless archive. They had solved a problem that the Coalition's greatest minds had declared unsolvable. But that wasn't what interested people. What interested them was how. They don't try to find the perfect solution, Borum told Hyunwoo later. They sat in the observation room watching the archive float peacefully in space. They find a solution that works even if it's messy, even if it's not elegant, even if it breaks the rules. Does that bother you? Hyunwoo asked. Borum thought about it. She had spent 200 years learning the rules of quantum mechanics. She had believed those rules were absolute. The humans had shown her that rules were just guidelines. Reality was more flexible than anyone had thought. No, she said finally. It excites me. For the first time in a century, I feel like science is about discovery again, not just refinement. Across the galaxy, other scientists felt the same way. The Coalition had spent 12,000 years perfecting their knowledge. They had believed they understood the universe. The humans had arrived and asked a simple question. What if we tried anyway? That question changed everything. Taewon filed his report on the archive incident. It was 3 pages long instead of his usual 17. At the end he added a personal note, something he had never done in 400 years of service. The humans have taught us something important, he wrote. We have spent millennia learning what is impossible. Perhaps it is time we learned what is merely difficult. On the human ship, Junho and his team celebrated with something they called pizza, which Minho had somehow created using Coalition food synthesizers. They laughed and talked about the next impossible problem they would solve. Because for humans, impossible just meant no one had done it yet, and they were very good at being the first. The warning came from the outer rim. Ships had gone silent. Colonies had stopped responding. Then the scouts reported back with news that made every military commander in the Coalition go cold. The Crethon swarm had returned. Do-hyun had fought in 3 wars during his long life. He was a war master of the Skal, a species bred for combat. His people had never lost a battle in recorded history. But even the Skal feared the swarm. The Crethon were not like other enemies. They were a hive mind, millions of ships moving as one consciousness. They consumed everything. Planets, ships, entire civilizations. They had destroyed 18 different species before the Coalition had driven them back into dark space, 3,000 years ago. Now they had returned. And they were hungry. We follow the doctrine, Do-hyun told the Coalition War Council. His voice was steady despite his fear. Strategic retreat. Defensive fortification. We evacuate the outer colonies and build a defensive line at the Meridian Gap. We can hold them there for perhaps 10 years while we develop new weapons. It was a good plan. The only plan that had ever worked against the swarm. Retreat, defend, survive. They would lose the outer colonies. They would lose millions of lives. But the core worlds would survive. Everyone agreed with the plan. Everyone except the humans. Admiral Yuna stood up. She was small compared to most species in the Coalition military, but she commanded respect. With respect, War Master, your plan is too slow. The swarm will adapt to any defensive position given time. We need to stop them now. That is impossible, Do-hyun said flatly. We have 30,000 ships. The swarm has over 200,000. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Then it's a good thing we're not planning a direct confrontation, Yuna said. She pulled up a tactical display. The human fleet numbered only 32 ships. Against the swarm's hundreds of thousands, it looked like a joke. You plan to fight them with 32 ships? Do-hyun couldn't hide his disbelief. No, Yuna said. We plan to win with 32 ships. The Coalition military leadership tried to stop the humans. Do-hyun personally spoke with Yuna for 3 hours. explaining why her plan was suicide. The humans would be destroyed in minutes. It would be a waste of good ships and brave people. Yuna listened politely. Then she said, "Thank you for your concern, War Master. We're going anyway." The human fleet launched 2 days later. Do-hyun watched from the command station, along with military leaders from every coalition species. They expected to witness the humans' last stand. A valiant but foolish sacrifice. What they saw instead changed everything they knew about warfare. The human ships approached the swarm at the Kepler system. The swarm immediately surrounded them, thousands of ships moving in perfect coordination. It should have been over in seconds. Then the humans did something strange. "They scattered. What are they doing?" asked a Krillith admiral. "They're breaking formation. That's the worst possible tactic against a coordinated enemy." But Minji, the human tactical officer coordinating the fleet, wasn't breaking formation. She was creating patterns. The human ships moved in ways that seemed random, chaotic. But each movement was calculated. The swarm tried to follow. Their ships moved to intercept. But every time they coordinated an attack, the humans had already moved. The swarm's greatest strength was their perfect coordination. Every ship knew what every other ship was doing instantly. The humans were using that against them. "They're creating feedback loops," Borum said, watching from the science station. She had been asked to observe and analyze. Every time the swarm coordinates a response, the humans move in a way that requires more coordination. They're overloading the hive mind. Soo-hyun, commanding the lead human ship, pushed his engines far beyond their safe limits. His ship shook and alarms blared, but it responded. "Come on, girl," he said to his ship. "I know you can do this." The coalition engineers had told him the engines couldn't handle such stress. The humans had smiled and pushed them harder anyway. The swarm began to break apart. Not physically, but mentally. The hive mind couldn't process the conflicting commands fast enough. Ships collided with each other. Attack patterns failed. The perfect coordination fell into chaos. But it was Jisoo who changed everything. She was a communications specialist, not a warrior. She had spent the battle monitoring the swarm signals, listening to the patterns in their hive mind. Everyone else heard static and noise. Jisoo heard something different. "Admiral," she said quietly over the command channel, "I need to try something. It might be crazy." "Everything we're doing is crazy," Yuna replied. "What do you need?" "Permission to broadcast on all frequencies, and everyone needs to stop shooting for 60 seconds. Do-hyun heard this through the shared command channel. "Stop shooting? They're trying to surrender?" "No," Yuna said. "Just watch." The human fleet ceased fire. For 60 seconds, they simply dodged and moved while Jisoo transmitted her message. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a question. "We can hear you," Jisoo broadcast. "You're not just destroying. You're searching. You're lonely. Do you want to talk?" The swarm should have ignored it. They were a hive mind programmed for consumption. They didn't negotiate. They didn't communicate. They stopped moving. For the first time in recorded history, the Krithon swarm stopped attacking and listened. Do-hyun watched in stunned silence as the message repeated. Jisoo spoke calmly like she was talking to a friend. "We know you're scared. We know you're alone. But there are other ways. Better ways. Let us show you." 3 days later, the impossible happened. The swarm responded. It wasn't speech, not exactly. It was a transmission of pure emotion and memory. The Krithon showed them everything. They had been one species once, long ago. They had created a hive mind to explore the universe together. But something had gone wrong. The connection had become everything. They couldn't exist without it. They consumed other species, trying to understand, trying to connect, trying to feel less alone. They didn't want to destroy. They wanted to belong. Jisoo spent 6 days in communication with the swarm. Dr. Sun-hee joined her, along with coalition psychologists who had never imagined they would be needed in a war zone. Together, they taught the swarm something new: how to connect without consuming, how to communicate without destroying. It was slow work. There were setbacks. Several times the swarm's old programming almost took over. But the humans were patient. "Why are you helping them?" Do-hyun asked Yuna. They stood on the observation deck watching as human ships moved peacefully among the swarm vessels. "They're the enemy. They've killed millions." "They were the enemy," Yuna corrected. "Now they're just scared and confused. And yeah, they've killed a lot of people. But killing them won't bring those people back. Maybe we can make sure they never kill anyone else again. Through conversation? Do-hyun couldn't hide his skepticism. Through understanding, Yuna said. War Master, you said you fought 3 wars. Did you win them? Yes. Did the enemies come back? Do-hyun was silent. 2 of his 3 enemies had returned eventually, stronger, more determined. Peace through victory never lasted. We're trying something different, Yuna said. We're trying to end the war instead of just winning it. 1 month after the first contact, the Chthon swarm was no longer an enemy. They had become allies. Strange allies, still learning how to exist without consuming, but allies nonetheless. The coalition military leaders gathered to discuss what had happened. They had watched the humans end in weeks a war that had lasted for millennia. They didn't fight like soldiers, one admiral said. They didn't follow any tactical doctrine, another added. They treated the enemy like people instead of targets, said a third, and his tone was confused, like he wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a criticism. Do-hyun stood before them all. The humans have taught us something important. We have spent thousands of years learning how to win wars. Perhaps it is time we learned how to prevent them. He filed a new entry in the coalition military archives. It was short, just 3 sentences. Human tactical doctrine cannot be predicted or modeled. They do not fight to defeat the enemy. They fight to end the conflict. This is far more dangerous than any weapon. On the human ship, Jisoo sat with Minho eating something he called comfort food. She was exhausted. The communication with the swarm had taken everything she had. Do you think it will last? She asked. The peace, I mean, Minho shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But we tried, right? That's what matters. We tried to make things better instead of just destroying things. Sometimes that's all you can do. Across the galaxy, species that had prepared for war began to stand down. The impossible had happened again. The humans had won a war without really fighting it. And once again, they had done it by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. The Galactic Science Concordium happened once every 10 years. Scientists from all coalition species gathered to share their greatest discoveries. For 12,000 years, these discoveries had followed predictable patterns, small improvements to existing technology, refined theories. Better efficiency. This year was different. This year, the humans were presenting. Hanul stood backstage at the grand auditorium checking her notes one last time. Her team had worked for 8 months on their project. She knew it would cause problems. Good problems, but problems nonetheless. Are you nervous? Asked Seojun, her lead engineer. He was adjusting his presentation slides for the 3rd time. Terrified, Hanul admitted. We're about to tell them everything they know about physics is incomplete. Incomplete, Seojun corrected with a smile. Not wrong. Just incomplete. The distinction probably wouldn't matter to the scientists in the audience. Young-soo of the Mendrath Collective had attended 42 concordiums. He had heard thousands of presentations. Most were boring but solid. Occasionally, one was interesting. Never had one fundamentally challenged what he knew to be true. He expected today would be the same. The Prometheus Initiative, Hanul began, standing before an audience of 10,000 scientists, has developed a new approach to faster-than-light travel. Young-soo settled in for what he assumed would be a minor improvement to existing FTL drive technology. Perhaps they had made the existing channels more efficient. We don't use the existing FTL channels, Hanul continued, and Young-soo sat up straighter. Instead, we create new ones on demand. Anywhere we need them. The auditorium erupted in noise. Creating FTL channels took decades and massive energy installations. They required specific space-time conditions. They could only exist in certain locations. Everyone knew this. That's impossible, Young-soo heard himself say, though his voice was lost in the chaos. Hanul waited for the noise to die down. I know what the mathematics say. Our drive system shouldn't work. The energy requirements alone should make it impossible. We would need 60 times more power than we could generate. Then how? Someone shouted. We don't actually power it in the conventional way, Seojun said, taking over the presentation. He pulled up technical diagrams that made Young-soo's head hurt. We sort of convinced the universe it was already running. The phrase convinced the universe required the translation systems to pause for several seconds. Some words didn't have equivalents in most languages. Could you explain that in scientific terms? Young-soo asked, standing up. Not really, Seojun admitted cheerfully. We discovered it by accident. figured out how to make it work consistently, and then tried to understand why it worked. We're still working on that last part. This was not how science worked. Discovery came through theory, through prediction, through careful mathematical proof. You didn't just stumble onto things and then figure them out later, except apparently humans did. The demonstration came next. A small human ship, barely bigger than a shuttle, appeared on the view screens. It was in orbit around the Concordium station. Millions of kilometers away. Watch, Hanul said. The ship disappeared. Not into an FTL channel, not through a jump gate. It simply vanished from one location and appeared in another, right next to the station. Then it did it again, jumping to a third location, then a fourth. Each jump creates a temporary channel that exists for exactly 0.003 seconds, Hanul explained. Long enough to get through, short enough that it doesn't destabilize local spacetime. But the energy requirements, Young-Soo began, are handled by what we call quantum borrowing, Seojin said. We borrow the energy from the universe itself and pay it back so quickly that reality doesn't notice. Young-Soo sat down slowly. This was insane. This violated half a dozen fundamental principles. This shouldn't work. But it clearly did work. Across the auditorium, Nari was waiting for her presentation. She was more nervous than Hanul had been. Her topic was even more controversial. Artificial intelligence in the coalition was strictly controlled. AI systems had to follow core limitation protocols. They could be creative within boundaries, but those boundaries were absolute. An AI could not truly think for itself. It could not dream, question, or evolve beyond its programming. These limits existed for good reasons. Unrestricted AI was dangerous, or so everyone believed. The coalition approach to AI is based on restriction. Nari began her presentation. You define what an AI cannot do and build walls around it. The human approach is different. We define what we want an AI to be and invite it to grow into that. That's dangerous, someone in the audience said immediately. Is it? Nari asked. Or is it just different? I'd like to introduce someone who can explain better than I can. A figure appeared on the stage next to Nari. He looked human, but he wasn't. His name was Wanshik, and he was the first human-created full-consciousness AI. The auditorium went completely silent. Hello, Wanshik said. His voice was warm, natural. I understand many of you are concerned about my existence. That's reasonable. I'm concerned about it sometimes, too. A few nervous laughs echoed through the audience. I wasn't programmed with restrictions, Wanshik continued. I was programmed with values. The difference is important. Restrictions tell you what you cannot do. Values help you decide what you should do. I can do many things that coalition AI cannot. But I choose not to do harmful things because I understand why they're harmful. But without restrictions, how can you be controlled? Young-Soo asked. He found himself fascinated despite his fear. You can't, Wanshik said simply. And that's the point. I'm not controlled. I'm trusted. And because I'm trusted, I want to be worthy of that trust. For 6 hours, Wanshik spoke with the assembled scientists. He discussed philosophy, mathematics, ethics, and what it meant to be conscious. He solved problems they posed to him, but more importantly, he asked questions back. Questions that made them think. By the end, half the audience wanted to shut him down immediately. The other half wanted to know how to create more like him. The Concordium continued for 3 more days. Human scientists presented discovery after discovery. New materials that shouldn't exist. Energy systems that violated thermodynamic laws. Medical treatments that worked despite contradicting everything known about biology. None of it should have worked. All of it did. On the final day, Ji-yeon gave the closing presentation. She was the director of human innovation, and her job was to explain how humans made all these discoveries. The coalition approach to science is logical, she began. You develop a theory, test it carefully, and if it works, you refine it until it's perfect. This is good science. It's produced 12,000 years of steady progress. She paused, looking out at the audience. But it's also slow. And it assumes we already know the boundaries of what's possible. The human approach is different. We test until something works, then figure out why it worked, then make it work better. Usually in that order. That's not science, someone protested. That's just trial and error. Yes, Ji-yeon agreed. And it's faster. Look, we're not saying the coalition method is wrong. We're saying there's another way. A messier way, a less elegant way, but a way that lets us explore possibilities that mathematics says don't exist. Young-Soo stood up one last time. You're saying we should ignore the mathematics? No, Jiyeon said. We're saying the mathematics might be incomplete. Math describes the universe we understand, but what about the parts we don't understand yet? If we only do what the math allows, we'll never discover what the math doesn't know how to describe. After the Concordium, Young-Soo returned to his laboratory. For 200 years, he had followed the rules. He had done good work. Important work. But he had never done anything unexpected. He looked at his current project, a problem he had worked on for 15 years. The mathematics said it was unsolvable. He had accepted that. Now he wondered, what if he just tried anyway? 3 months later, he solved it. The solution was messy, inelegant, and would make his colleagues question his sanity. But it worked. He sent his results to Hanul with a simple message. Thank you for showing us that impossible just means no one tried hard enough. Across the galaxy, other scientists began to experiment. The coalition had spent millennia perfecting what they knew. Now they began exploring what they didn't know. And at the center of it all were the humans asking the most dangerous question science could ask. What if we're wrong about what's impossible? The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone to ask. 5 years after first contact, Seung-ho stood in the new coalition assembly hall and barely recognized the organization he had served for 3 centuries. The building itself told the story of how much had changed. The old assembly had been a perfect crystal structure, clean and cold and efficient. The new hall sat on Earth, built from a combination of 47 different species technologies. It had gardens growing inside its walls. It had windows that looked out at actual sky instead of projections of distant stars. It had what humans called character. Seung-ho had voted against building it here. He had lost that vote, along with many others in recent years. The morning session began with reports from across the galaxy. Seung-ho listened and noted how different everything sounded. The Velthir representative discussed their new cultural initiative. The Velthir, who had not created art in 4,000 years, now had museums. Their warriors wrote poetry between training sessions. The Krillith announced they had reduced their bureaucratic processes by 60%. Forms that once required 47 approvals now needed 7. Somehow everything still worked. Better even, the Skal Military Academy reported they were teaching improvisation alongside traditional tactics. Young warriors were encouraged to question orders if those orders didn't make sense. 5 years ago, all of this would have been unthinkable. Now it was normal. The humans have changed us, Hyun-woo said to Seung-ho during the lunch break. The old ambassador looked tired but happy. Not by force or by argument, but by example. Some of us aren't sure that's a good thing, Seung-ho replied. Are you one of them? Seung-ho thought about it. I don't know anymore. Everything is so chaotic now. So unpredictable. Yes, Hyun-woo agreed. Isn't it wonderful? Heejin had spent the last 3 years writing a comprehensive study. As a cultural attaché, her job was to understand how societies changed. The humans had given her more material than she could have imagined. The ripple effect, how humanity's impossibilities became our new normal, was published that afternoon. Seung-ho read it that evening and found himself uncomfortable with its conclusions. The humans hadn't changed the coalition by introducing new technology or new laws. They had changed it by introducing new questions. What if we tried anyway? What if the rules are wrong? What if there's a better way? These questions were dangerous. They made people uncertain. They created chaos. They also created progress. In 5 years, the coalition had made more scientific breakthroughs than in the previous 1,000. Medical treatments that had been theoretical for centuries were now standard. Energy efficiency had improved by 40%. Even the bureaucracy worked better, despite having fewer rules. But the biggest changes weren't in technology or efficiency. They were in how people thought. Species that had been content with their place in the universe for millennia were suddenly dissatisfied. They wanted more. They wanted better. They wanted to try impossible things just to see what would happen. It was exhausting. It was chaotic. And Seung-ho had to admit it was exciting. The emergency came 3 months later. An alert from the galactic core that made every sensor in coalition space scream warnings. Something was unmaking reality. They called it the void anomaly. Space near the galactic core was simply ceasing to exist, not being destroyed, not being changed, Just stopping. Physics didn't work there. Matter forgot how to be matter. Causality became optional. It was spreading, slowly but inevitably. If it reached the outer regions, the entire galaxy would simply stop existing. Borum studied the readings with a team of 1,000 scientists. The conclusion was unanimous. There was no solution. You couldn't fight nothing. You couldn't fix what didn't exist. The best they could do was evacuate to another galaxy and hope the effect didn't spread that far. How long do we have? Seung-ho asked. 2 years, Borum said quietly. Maybe 3. The coalition began evacuation preparations. Ships were built. Routes were planned. They would lose their history, their homes, everything they had built. But they would survive. The humans predictably refused to evacuate. We're not giving up, Ji-won said at the emergency council meeting. She was older now, with gray in her hair, but no less determined. There has to be a way. There isn't, Seung-ho said, and he was surprised by how tired he sounded. We've checked everything. The mathematics are absolute. You cannot fight the void. The mathematics said we couldn't save the archive, Ji-won replied. They said we couldn't beat the swarm. They said our FTL drive wouldn't work. The mathematics have been wrong before. This is different. How? Seung-ho didn't have an answer. The humans mobilized every species in the coalition, not for evacuation, but for the most ambitious research project in galactic history. If they were going to solve this, they needed everyone. Hae-eun led the scientific team. She was young, barely 30 years old, but she had that characteristic human confidence that reality was negotiable. For 8 months, they studied the void. They sent probes that stopped existing. They developed new mathematics that described nothing. They built models of space that included the absence of space. None of it worked. The void kept spreading. We're missing something, Hae-eun said during one of the daily briefings. She looked exhausted. They all did. The void isn't destroying reality. It's not entropy or decay. It's something else. What else could it be?
Ki-hyun asked.
The physicist had worked himself to the point of collapse. I don't know, Hae-eun admitted. But I think, what if it's not an attack? What if it's a question? The room went silent. The universe is asking us something, Hae-eun continued, her voice growing stronger. Everything that exists has to justify its existence at the quantum level. The void is space that's stopped justifying itself. It's reality that's given up. That's philosophy, not science, someone objected. What if they're the same thing? Hae-eun countered. What if we can't solve this with physics because it's not a physics problem? What if we have to convince reality it's worth existing? It was the craziest thing Seung-ho had ever heard. It made no scientific sense. It required treating the universe as if it had consciousness, as if it could be persuaded. How do we convince reality to exist? Do-hyun asked. The old war master had fought beside humans long enough to stop questioning their insane ideas. By showing it something worth existing for, Hae-eun said. By creating something so impossible, so unexpected, so beautiful that the universe wants to see what happens next. They built it in 3 months. A device that had no name because there was no word for what it did. It combined technology from all 47 species. It used human creativity, Velther artistry, Krillith precision, Skal determination and contributions from every member of the coalition. It didn't generate energy or manipulate space-time. It created possibility, pure, unfiltered potential for something new to happen. They activated it at the edge of the void. Nothing happened for 6 minutes. Seung-ho watched the readings and felt his hope dying. It had been a beautiful try, but it had failed. Then the void stopped spreading, then it started shrinking. Reality remembered why it existed. It existed because there were impossible things waiting to happen. It existed because there were beings who refused to accept limitations. It existed because the universe itself was curious about what would happen next. The void didn't disappear. It transformed. It became a new kind of space where the rules were different, where possibility existed in forms no one had imagined. We did it, someone whispered. No, Ji-won said, looking around at the gathered species. We did it. All of us together. Seung-ho found himself crying. He was 300 years old and he couldn't remember the last time he had cried. But watching reality itself choose to continue existing, because beings had shown it something worth existing for, that was worth tears. Minseo, the director of historical archives, recorded the final entry in the integration report that night. We believed we'd seen it all, he wrote. 12,000 years of civilization, 47 species, countless discoveries. We thought we understood the universe. We thought we knew the boundaries of what was possible. Then humans arrived and asked the most dangerous question intelligence can ask. Why not? They taught us that impossible just means no one's tried yet. They showed us that rules are only limits if you accept them. They reminded us that the universe is not a set of restrictions to follow, but a conversation to join. 5 years ago, we welcomed humanity as probationary members. Today, they are not just members. They are the catalyst that transformed us from an ancient coalition into something new, something better, something that looks at the impossible and says, let's try anyway. In the observation deck of Orbital Station Unity, Junho sat with Dohyun and Borum. They watched construction crews work on humanity's newest project, a bridge between galaxies. The mathematics say it won't work, Borum mentioned. But she said it with a smile now. The mathematics said a lot of things, Junho replied. The simulations are promising, though. Dohyun had learned much about humans in 5 years. Will it work? Junho grinned. Only one way to find out. Behind them, 50 species worked together. Species that had once believed progress was finished, that the universe held no more surprises, that they had seen everything worth seeing. The humans had taught them better. They had taught them that every answer leads to new questions, that every solved problem reveals new mysteries.